Hello, and welcome to the Middle East Forum Speaker Webinar Series and Podcast. I'm Stacey Roman, and I will be moderating this discussion today. We're pleased to have Amatzia Baram, Professor Emeritus at the University of Haifa, join us to discuss Understanding Hezbollah's Escalation. Dr. Baram will speak for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I'll turn the discussion over to Amatzia Baram.
Thank you very much, Stacey. The subject of my brief talk today will be behind the growing audacity of Hezbollah on the Israeli-Lebanese border. You heard one or two analysts who suggested their explanations. I will suggest a different one, even though not on every issue. What we heard so far, was that the Lebanese-Israeli agreement with American moderation on the maritime border is the reason for Hezbollah's growing audacity on the Israeli-Lebanese border, because they felt that Israel is afraid, is scared, is panicky, and so they can be much bolder than they have ever been since 2006. Okay, so in other words, Israel showed fear, if not dread, and so it can be now manipulated much better. Well, maybe they feel that Israel showed fear, and so they can do more today. I'm not saying it's not possible, it's possible, even though they never mentioned it, but maybe. The Lebanese, Hezbollah threatened that if Israel start digging in Karish maritime field, they will attack the equipment there with drones. They sent 3 unarmed drones as threat, hint, and that's the reason. So Israel showed fear, and that's the result. I would say that, first of all, the Israeli government did it after deep consultations with the Israeli security community, and it was sort of a consensus that this should be done. The agreement should be signed. There was a certain concession, yes, territorial, not big, but there was something. It's true. So I'm not saying this is not possible, that this added to Hezbollah bravery, audacity, whatever. Yes, but I think that this is not the most important part. I think there are 2 other parts which are by far more important. A, Hezbollah is panicky, no less panicky, in Lebanon, not because of Israel, of course, but because of Lebanese developments, which nobody cares to try and understand. That's number 1. Number 2, I'll discuss it very briefly, and then I'll discuss briefly again how does Hezbollah, in my view, as I understand it, I've been studying them since 1982, and I still don't understand them on many occasions. So what I can say is I'll try to explain. How do I understand Hezbollah's understanding of the Israeli dilemma today, not in October 2022 when we signed the maritime border agreement? No, now, today. So start with the problems in Lebanon and why Hezbollah is so nervous. Look, in October of 2019, there were massive demonstrations against Hezbollah and against Iran in Lebanon. As a result of the economic disintegration, beginning of disintegration, today it's almost total, of the Lebanese state and economy and society. Then, right after that, you had elections in Lebanon. Well, not right, but soon after that. In the elections of May 2022, Hezbollah lost a majority, the majority it had in parliament in Lebanon. Now, Hezbollah can do in Lebanon anything it wants, parliament or not. But both Hezbollah's absolute preference and the Iranian preferences that it will be done in a way that looks legal, that looks legitimate, I'd say kosher. And if you do it when you have a minority in parliament and when the government and the president are against you, you can still conquer the whole of Lebanon. But that won't be exactly seen as kosher. And so that is Hezbollah's strategic goal, always to have in Lebanon a government and a president who do their bidding. If not, they are in trouble. And again, they'll still be the overlords, but they'll be sitting on their bayonets and they don't want it. The parliament of Lebanon has 128 seats. Out of it, Hezbollah and its allies had 71 votes, MPs. That was a comfortable majority. Not huge, but comfortable. After the elections, they went down to 62. 62 is 3 short of a tiny majority. One parliamentary seat majority. They need 65. And the opposition got only 61, so they don't have a majority either. But according to Lebanese, to the way they interpret the Lebanese constitution, I disagree with them. I think my interpretation of the Lebanese constitution is that this is not the right interpretation. But that's how it's been interpreted for many years now. You need 2/3 of the parliamentary votes in order to elect a president. Now, the president in Lebanon is almost as powerful as a president in America, not like in Israel, where it's a figurehead. Well, prestigious, but figurehead. Not in Lebanon. He has a huge political clout, real political clout. So Hezbollah, since 2022, is no longer sure that there were 12 attempts in parliament to elect a new president, and 12 times they failed. Now, Hezbollah is afraid that in the 13th and 14th and 15th, they won't manage to put their men. They have their own candidate for MG, doesn't really matter. But the point is, he's their guy. He's Maronite Christian, according to the constitution. This is what it should be. But he's their man. So they are not sure. In fact, they are very worried, very nervous that another guy who is, to my mind, a much more impressive guy, but it doesn't matter. He is the opposition's man, will win the majority vote. About 2/3 of the vote is so difficult to get in this parliament. But whatever, they are very worried. Why would that be so bad? It will be terrible, because the first thing that such a president will do, an anti-Hezbollah president, is to follow the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701 from August of 2006 that rules that apart from the military, the official government, Lebanese national military, no one can carry arms. Hezbollah was given sort of permission to carry arms because they always said, we are saving or protecting Lebanon against Israel, which is a terrible enemy, and so on. So people didn't quite buy it, but all right, let's keep it this way. But now something happened, and this is a new development in Lebanon, in addition to the elections results. As we all know, in last October, Israel and Lebanon signed the agreement. Now, the agreement had another repercussion for Hezbollah, if it had one, the one I mentioned before, of no longer fearing Israel or fearing Israel less. It had another repercussion. Nobody is looking at it. And I think this is very important. People in Lebanon started saying, wait a minute, started saying everything. Hezbollah agreed to the agreement, to the maritime border agreement. Hezbollah agreed to it. It had to agree because of its very bad position in Lebanese public opinion, as I described before. So they agreed. Once they agreed, they demonstrated to one and all that Israel is not a dangerous enemy. Israel is willing even to give a little piece of Mediterranean to Lebanese economic sovereignty. Just don't bother us with new wars and so on. So Israel doesn't want war. Israel is not an enemy. Certainly not a threatening enemy. And so why should Hezbollah be still keeping their weapons? And people are starting to say that right after the October 2022 agreement. So now Hezbollah is A, afraid that a new president might do it to them, and B, the public sees more and more that they are not necessary. Israel is not threatening Lebanon in any way. So they are in trouble. This is the reason why Hezbollah are very nervous, and they have to prove that they are protecting Lebanese territory, Lebanese sovereignty, Lebanese honor, Lebanese interests, Lebanese, not Iranian, not Shiite, Lebanese, national, and so on. So you have one reason why they need to push more along the border and show, here we show that we are here, there we show that we are there, and so on. Israel cannot step on Lebanese territory, and so on. So that's number one. But number two, actually. Number three, Israel. Israel, since February, March this year, Israel is in big trouble. Let's face it. We are in big trouble, the biggest trouble that I remember since 1948-49. Bigger, in a way, than the Yom Kippur War, and I won't go into that, because of the political dispute, and it's becoming very bitter in Israel today. Let's face it. I don't think we are going into a civil war. People are talking about it, and it's a good thing to talk about, because if you talk about it, you don't do it. In Iraq, nobody talked about it, and they started it. In Yugoslavia, they didn't talk about it. All of a sudden, it was on. In Israel, we talk about it. Jewish people talk about everything. Hopefully, it won't happen. I doubt it that it will happen. But we are split down the middle, more or less. And the Hezbollah is looking at it. He look at Nasrallah in particular. He's a very shrewd analyst. He's looking at Israel. He says, hey, Israel militarily is on the way down. Now he understands we are not on the way down so precipitously. Not really. If he starts a war in a month or 2 or 3, nothing will be left of large parts of Lebanon. So he understands that. But what he does understand too is that the government is in trouble. The Israeli government, the prime minister, the Israeli government is in trouble. The Israeli government is seen in Paris, in Berlin. Somehow it's difficult to say Berlin for me. Never mind. In Berlin, in London, and most of all in Washington, D.C. The White House, state. The Israeli government is seen as bad news. Not that they are going to, all the Western countries are going to drop Israel like a rotten apple. That's not going to happen, and they know it. Hezbollah knows. But they know one thing which is correct, I think. They know that when this government is seen as bad news by the West is the main supporter of Israel. When that's the case, they must make sure that if there is war again between Israel and Hezbollah, there will be 100% fail-proof justification for it. So Hezbollah is making every effort to provoke us, which they do more than ever since 2006, but not to cross a certain threshold that will show to the world, especially to the West, of course, that actually they started a war. If they started a war, how can Israel stay aloof? Israel will have to respond. And so they understand that this particular government, because of the split in Israeli society, more or less 50-50, over the judicial reform or revolution, depending how you want to define it, the Israeli government is much more limited than any Israeli government ever before from responding to Hezbollah provocations. And I believe that they are right. And I believe that the Israeli government is restrained. I'm not unhappy about being restrained. It's okay. But it gives them more and more encouragement to do more. Now, they don't want to go too far because I understand what I said. They understand that they don't want to give Israel an excuse that will be seen all around the world as sufficient to start a war. Israel doesn't want war, but it will be pushed to start a war. Okay, they don't want it. So they'll try to do everything to do below the threshold. Add to it the Iranian approach, and that's where I'll end my presentation. The Iranians, too, are happy to see Hezbollah provoking Israel more and more because Israel is acting against them in Syria, not in Lebanon, against their people and installations in Syria. And they are very unhappy, extremely unhappy about it. So if Hezbollah, not Lebanon, is provoking Israel and showing that Israel is weak and Israel is no good and Israel can be humiliated, in Tehran they are quite happy about it. But they too understand that Hezbollah must not give Israel an excuse to start war or push Israel so hard that it will have to start war, to start a campaign, a big campaign. Because Hezbollah is crucial for the interests of Iran. I won't go into that. Iran cannot, the Iranian regime, the Ayatollah's regime, cannot afford the loss of Hezbollah in Lebanon. They cannot afford it. If they lose Hezbollah in Lebanon, they may lose power in Tehran. It's as bad as that from their point of view. So they are also telling the Lebanese, Hezbollah, stand shvoye. Please keep it low. Provoke the Israelis, humiliate them, do anything you like below the threshold. And I end by saying that I don't know what is the threshold. I don't think any Israeli knows what the threshold is. I don't think any Hezbollah commander or even Nasrallah himself know what is the threshold. And that's a danger. Because if they cross a certain threshold, that Israel will really believe is too much, then you'll have war. In such a war, I can say much of Israel will be devastated. There is no other way. They can lob at us between 3,000 and 4,000 rockets a day and missiles, a day, including 300, 400, 500 very accurate ones. So if you compare it to 2006, this is not good. In 2006, it was bad enough, only about 100 missiles and mainly rockets every day, 100. Now they can do, I don't know, nobody knows exactly how many, but the assessment is at least 3,000. And that means that until we manage to silence them and to end the war, Israel will suffer heavily. So nobody wants it. Nobody is dreaming that this is a possibility. But the danger is that something will happen. Their self-confidence is growing, and that something will happen. So my recommendation, I have just one recommendation. I cannot recommend anything to Nasrallah. I'm sorry. I recommended to him a few things before. He didn't heed my recommendations. But I can recommend it to my government and say, Mr. Prime Minister, dear government, dear cabinet, do something to end the dispute in Israel, to bring Israel back to what it was a year ago. And I have no doubt that Nasrallah will get the message and will again get back to his correct. He'll understand what are his real proportions. That's my presentation.
So thank you so much for that presentation. Daniel Pipes also expresses that, saying, thank you so much for this insightful analysis. Why is Hezbollah so crucial to the regime in Tehran?
Good question. Khomeini established Hezbollah at 1982. When he did it, before he died in 1989, 7 years later, he lost the war against Iraq. I know that people say it was like a ceasefire, nobody won the war. No, he lost the war against Iraq. He really did. I can say for Saddam, this was a Pyrrhic victory. Okay, one more such victory and Iraq is gone. But in Iran, everybody understood Khomeini lost the war because he promised to take Karbala back and Najaf back, let alone Baghdad. Before Baghdad after that. And of course, nothing of that happened. So he lost the war, and everybody knew that. His great success, and it was a success, a major, was Hezbollah, and to an extent also Iranian dominance in Syria. But Hezbollah is much dearer to his heart, was to his heart, and as a result to Khamenei, to the Rahbar, the chief leader, the great leader of today. Because Hezbollah is a Shi'i foothold in the middle of the Arab homeland, the Arab nation, the Arab world. And from Hezbollah, and similar, now he has it also in North Yemen. But Hezbollah is much more important because they really control Lebanon. And their support for Assad was survival. Thanks to them, then to the Soviets, to the Russians, sorry, not Soviets, the Russians. But first of all, to Hezbollah, even before Iran could send troops to Syria, Hezbollah saved Assad and I would say Iran. So for the prestige of having Hezbollah controlling Lebanon and hopefully spreading their influence and their maybe soft power elsewhere in the Arab world and the Islamic world, hugely important. If they are lost, and Khomeini's only achievement in the Iraq-Iran war during the Iraq would be Hezbollah, if that it would be lost. Without Hezbollah, also Assad is much weaker because Hezbollah help Assad even today. So, because we are not fighting them, we don't want to fight them. So Hezbollah is free, they can turn their back on us and fight against Assad, against Assad's enemies, which they did from 2011 until even now. So what I would say is, yes, for the Iranians, Hezbollah is the first foothold and Khomeini's legacy. You cannot lose it. It's as simple as that.
Thank you. Barry Werner asks, if Hezbollah does provoke a war with Israel and Israel invades, will the Lebanese support Israel against Hezbollah?
No, I'd say no. Many Lebanese, I'd say maybe today, the majority, when we see what happened during the elections, 50-50. In parliament, the elections were democratic. The problem with the elections for anti-Hezbollah political forces is that only 41% of Lebanese who could vote voted. Why? Because they are so disillusioned about this whole democracy business. By the way, same happened in Iraq. And yet both in Iraq, and which is really interesting, both in Iraq and in Lebanon, the elections were democratic, really democratic. And despite the fact that the opposition to Hezbollah in Lebanon and the opposition to Iran in Iraq didn't have a lot of support in the ballots because so many people who opposed Iran didn't go to vote. Still in Iraq and in Lebanon, the pro-Iranian forces lost their majority in parliament, in both parliaments. In Iraq, the Iranians manipulated the system in a brilliant way, and today the most of parliament, without elections, is pro-Iranian. In Lebanon, it doesn't work so easily. Lebanon has a much longer democratic history. And so far the Iranians failed. So I'd say that, yes, you have majority, no doubt majority, maybe 60%, maybe 65 or 70% of Lebanese against Hezbollah and against Iran. But will they fight them in order to support Israel? Absolutely not. Too dangerous.
Absolutely. So Mark Hager actually follows up on this. If Hezbollah's opposition becomes the president, why would the LAF want to start a civil war against a powerful Hezbollah? And Steve Orlow asks, who or what can force Hezbollah to relinquish their arms?
Well, I'd say the first step would be to force them to relinquish their arms. The first step would be a new president that will be against Hezbollah. As I said before, we still the candidate of the opposition still didn't manage to get two-thirds of parliament. That's number one. And then as president, and the government then will be again, majority against Hezbollah or altogether against Hezbollah, they'll become the opposition in parliament. Then they'll need a lot of courage, both parliament and if that happens, and the president, of course, a lot of courage to decide to demand of Hezbollah to give up its weapons. A lot of courage. Now, once they do that, then legally Hezbollah is in a terribly disadvantageous position. Terrible. What will Hezbollah do? They can simply disregard this order. It's legal, but we don't have to obey the court, right? Not even the Supreme Court. We don't have to. We do what we want because they are the only meaningful military force in Lebanon. So I don't know if it can be done. Israel will not start war in Lebanon in order to get Hezbollah to obey the Lebanese president, government, and Supreme Court. No way. So they will continue to keep their weapons and to rule in Lebanon. But their position in Lebanon will be very, very weak, much weaker than today, because they will be seen as an Iranian occupation of Lebanon. Absolutely an occupation. I would like to push them to that position. I don't think it will start a civil war. The reason is that the anti-Hezbollah forces cannot match Hezbollah's military prowess. They cannot, there's no way. And so you'll have the moral power will be behind the new president and the government and maybe a Supreme Court, and the power of the gun will be behind Hezbollah. So Lebanon will turn into something else. From an Israeli point of view, it's good. Is it good for Lebanon? That's a matter of the Lebanese to decide. But I'll say again, it's very difficult to do what you just said, what the questions are, they suggested, because you need 2/3 of the parliament, 2/3. One power has 61, one power has 62. Maybe the Druze could be shifted towards Hezbollah. They did it before, now they don't. Maybe a few independents can be shifted towards Hezbollah. I doubt it that you can shift more independents to support the opposition. It isn't happening. So we are stuck.
Thank you. Mehrdad Kansari asks, while for some time constant reference is being made about Hezbollah's provocations that might somehow get out of hand, there is very little reference to this in general media in the West. Why is the potential of another deadly war not receiving the kind of coverage that something like this deserves?
Look, first of all, we have to go to the facts. The facts are that the first provocation, which was in any way meaningful, was in March of this year, which is 2.5 months after the new government came to power after the elections and so on in Israel. So it really is playing on the Israeli dilemma. Hezbollah is playing, you see it happened, began in March, last March, then more and more and so on. The world doesn't have time for Israel and Lebanon now because you have Ukraine. Ukraine is such a huge issue. So people are not, and there is no shooting war between Israel and Lebanon, let's face it. Even in Ukraine, nobody did anything until there was a shooting war. If there is, God forbid, a shooting war between us and Hezbollah, then the world will pay attention. The world won't be able to help much. That's the truth of it. Israel will be suffering substantial damage, substantial casualties, and Lebanon more. How can the world stop it? United Nations Security Council resolution? Yes, but not before the two sides suffer really heavily and are both interested to stop it. I cannot be very optimistic, so I hope it will be avoided altogether. A war that you avoided is always much better than a war that you won. So I'd say avoid the war. But again, there is a point in which if Hezbollah is miscalculating and is doing something which is totally crazy, Israel really will have no option. And today, even we have many Israeli analysts, I'm not one of them, but I can understand the reason, definitely, that say Israel should soon do it. And I'll tell you why. This is something which people don't know. This is history, and I'm a historian, also to an extent military historian, but not of Iraq, not of Israel and the Arabs, but of Iraq and Iran. But I'm sure all of us remember the June 6, 1967, the beginning of the Six-Day War between Israel on the one hand side, and then Egypt, Syria, Jordan. The reason that Israel initiated this war were 2-3 different reasons combined. It was a perfect storm. But no less important than the Egyptian blocking of the Straits of Tiran, the entrance to Eilat from the Red Sea and so on, the Arabian Ocean and so on. One of the two most important reasons, the other one, was deterrence. On the eve of the war of 1967, Israel lost its deterrence. And the military went to Levi Eshkol, the prime minister, and said to him, Mr. Prime Minister, the Arabs, especially Egypt, but also Syria, to a large extent Jordan too, are moving in a way which is clearly showing that we lost our deterrence. We have to resuscitate, to refresh, if you wish, our deterrence. Now, had it not been for the blocking of the straits and all the threats, the concentration of Egyptian troops on the borders of Sinai, Negev, probably they wouldn't start the war. But this is what decided the launching of Israeli offensive air force attack and so on. Why am I saying it? Because today many analysts, not everybody, not maybe the majority, but serious analysts are saying we are practically there. We lost our deterrence against Hezbollah. We don't want war. But if they do something which is really very great chutzpah, then maybe we should do something serious. I am saying cool it off, but I understand very well their argument.
Thank you. And if you'll bear with me just a few more minutes, we have one more question. We have quite a few questions, but one more that we'll be asking today. So in regards to your recommendations, do something to end the dispute in Israel. Elise Corson asks, so Hezbollah is attacking Israel because Qatar stopped its funding or subsidies. Hezbollah is attacking Israel because it can't form a government in Lebanon. And Israel is perceived as weak by both because its government is religious right, which half of Israel can't stand. And the solution is a strong, united Israeli government?
Yes.
Yes.
Definitely, yes. There's no question. But if that's not possible, which I'm not sure it's possible, the solution is for this Israeli government. This is my prime minister, my government. Half of the Israelis voted for it. Well, 64 against 56, but hey, this is 50-50, It's supported by half of the Israeli population. Okay, great. Stop, I would say immediately, stop the reform, the judicial reform in its tracks. Say we are stopping it for the rest of our government until the next elections in 2.5 years or 2 years or 3 years. We are stopping it. We are now getting to concentrate our efforts on rebuilding the military, the parts of the military which were damaged until now because of this political split in Israel, tragic split. We are going to go full steam on the economy. I think it was Clinton who said it's an economy idiot or something. I think it was Clinton who said it, that it's an economy. Yes, deal with the economy, deal with security, and do what you need to do as a good government, and they can be a very good government.
Well, hopefully everyone listens to your recommendation there. All right. Well, thank you so much. We've come to the close of our webinar. Thank you again, Dr. Baram, for joining us today.